Good evening. You're watching QTV News. In tonight's headlines, His Highness the Emir sends a cable of condolence to the Algerian president on the victims of flash floods in his country, with the death toll now put at 340. Afghan opposition forces report new gains to the north of Mazar-e-Sharif and appear determined to advance on Kabul as US bombers level a Taliban village to the ground, killing 300 civilians and wounding several others. And Taiwan secured admission to the World Trade Organization here in Doha on Sunday, gaining the unanimous approval of WTO members, barely 24 hours after arch-rival China. Their Highnesses the Emir, Sheikh Hamad bin Khalifa Al Thani, the Deputy Emir and Heir Apparent, Sheikh Jassim bin Hamad Al Thani, and the Prime Minister, Sheikh Abdullah bin Khalifa Al Thani, have sent cables of condolence to the Emir of Bahrain, Sheikh Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa, on the death of Sheikh Ali bin Khalifa bin Mohammed bin Isa Al Khalifa. Their Highnesses have also sent cables of condolence to the ruler of Sharjah, Dr. Sultan bin Mohammed Al Qasimi, who's also a member of the UAE's Supreme Council, on the death of Sheikh Moza bin Mohammed bin Saqr Al Qasimi. At the same time, Their Highnesses the Emir, the Deputy Emir and Heir Apparent, and the Prime Minister sent cables of condolence to the Algerian President, Abdelaziz Bouteflika, on victims of the flash floods that cover parts of the Republic. The death toll in Algeria's worst flooding for years, meanwhile, rose to over 340 on Sunday, as more bodies were found in the capital, Algiers, which suffered the hardest. The government promised aid for stricken families after an emergency cabinet meeting, but the gesture came too late to save the country's leaders from fierce attacks by newspapers, which said they were warned of the disaster but did nothing. Algiers' working-class district of Bab el-Oued was the worst hit, with 150 of its people perishing. Heavy rain and strong gales lashed coastal parts of the country, which extends far south into the Sahara Desert, on Friday and Saturday, and meteorologists forecast no major let-up in the bad weather before Tuesday. State media said at least 300 people had been injured and some 5,500 families left homeless in Algiers and elsewhere. Observers at the UN headquarters in New York say after a day of debate and meetings dominated by the threat of international terrorism, the focus at the UN General Assembly is likely to shift Sunday towards conflict in the Middle East and Africa. UN Secretary-General Kofi Annan's first scheduled appointment early Sunday was with the President of the Palestinian Authority, Yasser Arafat, who's due to speak from the Assembly rostrum later Sunday morning, Eastern Time. While they are meeting in Annan's 38th floor office, US Secretary of State Colin Powell will hold private talks in New York's Waldorf Astoria Hotel with Israeli Foreign Minister Shimon Peres. US President George W. Bush, one of the first speakers after the 7-day annual debate of world leaders opened on Saturday, said he was committed to a just peace in the Middle East, including a Palestinian state. But Pervis, in an interview broadcast Saturday by Swedish radio, said it would be a mistake for Arafat to unilaterally declare statehood. Powell has also scheduled talks with Farouk al-Shara, Foreign Minister of Syria, a key player in the Middle East conflict, and a state officially described by the United States as a sponsor of terrorism. The theme of terrorism dominated the first day of the debate, which was postponed for almost 7 weeks after the destruction of New York's World Trade Center on September the 11th. President Arafat later addressed the UN General Assembly, praising President Bush for again underlining Washington's commitment to the establishment of a viable Palestinian state. However, the Bush administration continued to hold Arafat and the Gaza-based Palestinian Authority under his chairmanship responsible for what it calls continued violence in the territories. The White House also failed to arrange a Bush-Arafat meeting on the sidelines of the UN Assembly session, a move much criticised by Arab nations and described as extremely disappointing by the Palestinian leadership. Speaking through an interpreter, Arafat again called for the implementation of agreements already signed between Israel and the Palestinians.
My deepest appreciation for President George W. Bush and his declaration in his statement yesterday about the necessity to achieve a just peace based on the implementation of the Security Council resolutions 242 and 338, and as well as resolution 425, and on the basis of two-state solution, Israel and Palestine, and to expeditiously resume the peace.
U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell on Sunday hailed progress made in the U.S.-led campaign against Afghanistan's ruling Taliban regime, but cautioned against an opposition push for the capital, Kabul. Afghanistan's opposition Northern Alliance said they've captured the northern Afghan province of Takhar, including the capital, Taloqan. In western Afghanistan, the opposition Northern Alliance captured the strategic town of Kala-Inau on Sunday, after an intense 4-hour battle, and is now heading towards the city of Herat. Hundreds of opposition troops, backed by tanks and artillery, have been deployed north of Kabul, ready for an assault to take nearby Taliban positions that have made Bagram Airport unusable. Taliban forces dug in north of Kabul on Sunday. A military victory at Mazar-e-Sharif on Friday was seen as a key to opening up a supply route from Uzbekistan for humanitarian and military aid to anti-Taliban forces and the civilian population as the harsh winter approaches. Afghan opposition Northern Alliance Foreign Minister Abdullah said on Sunday that the main fighting force of the Taliban had been lost after their defeats in the north of the country in the last 48 hours. He said his forces were now advancing towards the strategic province of Kunduz, which commands routes to the Central Asian Republic of Tajikistan. U.S. bombing continued on Sunday for a 36th day of strikes against the Taliban for harbouring Osama bin Laden. Taliban officials reported that U.S. bomb attacks had destroyed a village near the Taliban stronghold of Kandahar and killed 300 people, the heaviest civilian casualties since the airstrikes began. Also, a factory on the outskirts of Kabul is reported to have been hit in an overnight air raid by U.S. forces, killing 2 local workers. Meanwhile, Taliban forces have tightened security around the streets of Kabul as opposition forces in northern Afghanistan continued to advance down the main road to Kabul. Taliban checkpoints have been set up around Kabul to make sure that the opposition forces don't sneak weapons, communication sets and satellite phones into the city. Kabul residents have not forgotten the Mujahideen power struggle when rockets rained from the sky, hospitals ran short of blood, and walking in the street was dicing with death. Summary execution, highway robbery and murder were commonplace. The U.S. administration on Sunday urged Afghan opposition forces to surround but not occupy Kabul after the Northern Alliance took the pivotal northern city of Mazar-e-Sharif, where only pockets of resistance still remain. Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld said opposition fighters should seek to isolate the capital, get the ruling Taliban to surrender and make way for a broad-based government.
Terribly damaged place. Third, whoever takes it is going to have to feed it. And the humanitarian assistance that is going to be required in there rapidly is going to be enormous. Now, what does all that say? It says that the real prize of prizes, to use it.
In Rome, a senior advisor to the former king warned the Northern Alliance of the possible implications of taking Kabul and urged them to keep a promise not to seize the capital. In London, Britain's defence minister on Sunday said his government wanted the Northern Alliance to build on the seizure of Mazar-e-Sharif and make progress towards the Afghan capital, Kabul. In an interview with BBC Radio, Defence Minister Jeff Hoon also confirmed for the first time that British troops were on the ground in Afghanistan, providing advice and assistance for alliance fighters.
Benefiting the entire world.
But President George W. Bush said on Saturday that opposition troops should steer clear of Kabul, reflecting a U.S. effort to ensure that power is eventually shared among the various ethnic groups of the country. Bush made his comments at a joint news conference with Pakistan's President Pervis Musharraft, who swiftly agreed that the Northern Alliance must not move into Kabul. In his speech to the General Assembly, Pakistan's president said that Pakistan took a deliberate, principled decision to join the world coalition coalition against terrorism. But Musharraft also pointed out the abandonment his fellow countrymen felt following the 1989 war in Afghanistan and called on the coalition not to repeat those mistakes. Musharraft said he feared a Northern Alliance takeover would lead to the same atrocities that occurred after troops from the former Soviet Union were driven out more than a decade ago.
Then also, we were a frontline state. And what we got in return was 3 million refugees, a shattered economy, drugs, and Kalashnikov culture.
2 months to the day since terror strikes in New York and at the Pentagon, US President George W. Bush on Sunday was to pay tribute to victims from 80 nations at the tomb of rubble that was once the proud World Trade Center. Even as he prepared to emphasize the global reach of the September the 11th attacks, Bush celebrated Veterans Day at an armory and said the onslaught he thought has made the annual tributes to past and present members of the US Armed Forces more heartfelt. Bush won cheers and a standing ovation when he declared that suspected terrorist mastermind Osama bin Laden and his Al-Qaeda network have made a serious mistake, adding, "And because our military is brave and prepared and courageous, they will pay a serious price." Pope John Paul II on Sunday appealed for urgent humanitarian aid for Afghanistan's people. The pontiff didn't mention directly the US-led military strikes in the Angelus prayer, which he said from his window overlooking St. Peter's Square. United Nations humanitarian aid has continued to reach the Uzbek-Afghan border as aid officials prepared to drive the much-needed food supplies into Afghanistan. Opening a land link with US ally Uzbekistan would allow military and humanitarian supplies to flow across the border to anti-Taliban forces and the local population. Meanwhile, thousands of Thai Muslims have turned out in Bangkok to protest against the US-led strikes in Afghanistan. The chief imam of Thailand, Sawart Smarayansk, led thousands of Muslims in prayer. During the rally, people donated money to help the thousands of Afghan refugees displaced by the war in Afghanistan. The US administration on Sunday said it doubted that terror suspect Osama bin Laden his claim to possess nuclear weapons, but said he was trying to get such weapons and would not hesitate to use them. Top officials said, however, it was likely that bin Laden, who is blamed for the September the 11th terrorist attacks, had chemical and biological weapons. National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice said the administration was nevertheless taking his claims seriously. Meanwhile, several hundred anti-nuclear activists travelling on more than 200 tractors played cat and mouse with police, using a series of road blockades to protest the impending arrival of a shipment of atomic waste from France. On the third day of the fourth WTO ministerial session here at the Doha Sheraton, Taiwan secured admission to the international organisation on Sunday. Qatari Economy Minister His Excellency Yusuf Hussein Kamal, the chairman of the WTO conference, formally approved Taiwan's entrance with the bang of a gavel. Meanwhile, a senior Doha police official denied Sunday reports that a Qatari soldier had fired a warning shot near a security checkpoint installed for the ministerial conference. At the same time, and as ministers from the 142-nation WTO neared the halfway stage of a 5-day conference, delegates said the outcome was finely balanced. Details of these stories and other developments on the third day of the historic gathering in the Qatari capital in the following report filed by the QTV Channel 2 team at the Doha Sheraton.
I wish to inform the Ministerial Conference that the signing ceremony of the protocol on accession of the separate custom territory of Taiwan, Pinghu, Kinmen and Mutsu will take place tomorrow at 7 o'clock.
WTO ministers celebrated another milestone when Taiwan became the newest player in the organisation. Following China's historic admission to the WTO, Taiwan's increased economic integration between the political rivals. Ministers meeting in plenary session set aside their squabbles and approved by consensus the accession of Taiwan. Minister of Finance, Economy and Trade, Yusuf Hussein Kamal, chairman of the conference, formally approved Taiwan's entrance. Taiwan Economy Minister Lin Xin-yi said it took his country 12 years of strenuous negotiations to join. Countries in the 142-member WTO approved Taiwan's membership without a vote. Instead, they showed their agreement by making no objection to Taiwan's application. Taipei's big step came after Beijing concluded a 15-year march to become part of the global trading network, when delegates unanimously endorsed its membership. Taiwan is scheduled to sign the accession agreement on Monday. After the ceremony of Taiwan's accession, China signed documents of its own admission, which was approved the previous day. Minister Kamal congratulated China on behalf of the Emir and people of Qatar. WTO Director General Mike Moore referred to it as a momentous occasion.
It is a historical moment which the whole world will remember, especially in Qatar. We are honored to see the accession in Doha during the 4th World Trade Organization Ministerial Conference. And I am personally honored to have chaired the meeting that adopted the accession report.
This is a great day. Membership in the WTO is a defining moment both for the WTO and for China, as well as for the international economic, political and security arrangements that will influence our world in this century and beyond. The near universal acceptance of the WTO's rules-based system.
In China, President Jiang Zemin said that while membership would bring opportunities for his country, it also posed considerable challenges. Beijing and Taipei will become members 30 days after presenting articles of ratification of the deal to the WTO Secretariat. Delegates entered the third day of their 5-day conference still far apart on several critical issues, any one of which could doom their bid to forge an agenda for a new cycle of wide-ranging negotiations to lower trade barriers. But throughout much of the day, the focus was on the proposed launch of a new round of talks to lower trade barriers worldwide, where Japan is pressing for the inclusion of punitive anti-dumping duties as an agenda item. A senior WTO official and conference sources reported no noticeable shift in some of the entrenched national and regional positions. 3 days into the conference, delegates by all accounts have yet to show much flexibility. US negotiators were meeting counterparts from developing countries to bridge a sharp disagreement over the right of poor nations facing public health crises to override WTO rules protecting drug patents held by big pharmaceutical companies. Developing countries are demanding a looser interpretation of copyright regulations, but have encountered stiff resistance from the United States, Switzerland and other industrialized powers, who say patent protection encourages companies to invest in research and development. Ministers emphasized equality and protection for all members.
The Netherlands is built on foreign trade, and that's why we like the WTO.
Ministerial conference so agrees.
China has been accepted into the World Trade Organization at a ministerial meeting in the Gulf state of Qatar. US Representative Robert Solik said the move was a good one for both China and the trade body.
We congratulate China on its extraordinary efforts to reach this point. And I also want to recognize the long labors of my predecessor, Ambassador Barshevsky, who worked hard for this historic day. China's leaders and officials understand that the implementation of their commitment will be a daunting challenge. WTO members will need to work with China, for example, through the transitional review mechanism, and watch closely to assure that the changes to the world trading system brought about by this important new member strengthen the system and are in accordance with its commitments.
China's accession caps a 15-year bid by Beijing to join the organization. It also ends a 20-year-old practice of reviewing US trade relations with China each year. Solik said China now faced the challenge of reforming its laws and regulations, as well as a wide range of state practices, to bring itself in line with WTO rules. Michelle Carlisle, Reuters.
I'm sorry, we appear to have had some technical problems with the first part of those reports. An overnight gun battle caused heavy damage and casualties on Friday in the second largest town in Russia's breakaway separatist Chechnya province, but authorities and Chechen fighters gave widely varying accounts of the conflict.
These pictures, shot by a local cameraman in Chechnya and shown to Reuters in Moscow, are claimed to show the slaughter of civilians by Russian troops in the Chechen town of Argon. The footage shows several bodies and severe damage Chechen rebels claim were the result of shooting and shelling by Russian forces. The bodies show signs of injuries consistent with mortar fire. The rebels claim 15 civilians died and 40 were injured. Russian authorities said its forces killed up to 9 rebels in a gun battle that erupted in Argon over 2 days. The Russian news agency Interfax quoted unnamed military officials saying the claims by residents of civilian deaths were being checked. The graphic footage of the aftermath shows outraged Chechens cursing Russia as they mourned the latest casualties of Moscow's battle to bring the rebellious province back under its control. Russia has dismissed international criticism of reported civilian casualties and atrocities by its troops in Chechnya, insisting its forces are fighting what it called the same international terrorism that destroyed the World Trade Center in New York. Western criticism of Russia's conduct in Chechnya has softened following strong support by Russia for what the United States has called its war on terrorism. Paul Chapman, Reuters.
On a much lighter note, the world #1 golfer Tiger Woods said he's ready to defend his World Cup title in Japan next week despite a sore back. The 25-year-old American wooed 8,000 fans in Shenzhen on Saturday when he took on 3 leading professionals from Hong Kong, China and Taiwan in an exhibition game. Packed shoulder to shoulder, the crowds cheered and clapped, mesmerised by every move of the world #1 in what was his first visit to mainland China. Woods trailed China's #1 Zhang Lianwei until the 16th hole, but Woods responded superbly with an eagle at the 16th before picking up a birdie at the 17th. Woods, Zhang and Taiwan's Ye Wei-che finished the Mission Hills China Challenge in a tie at 1 under par 71. Each spectator paid 2,000 Hong Kong dollars, that's $256 US, to watch Woods play. And now for a closing look at tonight's main points in the news. His Highness the Emir sends a cable of condolence to the Algerian president on the victims of flash floods in his country, with the death toll now put at 340. Afghanistan opposition forces report new gains to the north of Mazar-e-Sharif and appear determined to advance on Kabul as US bombers level a Taliban village to the ground, killing 300 civilians and wounding several others. And Taiwan secured admission to the World Trade Organization here in Doha on Sunday, gaining the unanimous approval of WTO members barely 24 hours after arch-rival China. And that brings us to the end of tonight's news here on QTV. Until tomorrow, from all of us in the newsroom, good night.